Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Congelos. I'm the managing partner here at CNA Financial Group. It's my pleasure to spend this evening with you, speaking to you with regard to planning for retirement and distributions, in retirement planning. So that being said, we'll get started. I got a little bit of a presentation to walk you through. As always, we start with our normal disclosures, which is just so that you are aware of this. This is not intended to provide tax or legal advice. These are our opinions. And so, with that in mind, let's move forward. So, it's interesting is, if you think in terms of, careers, I always say there's 2 days that are the most significant in our careers. And it's the day we start, but even more important than that is going to be the day that we stop. The reason why I say that's the most important, the day we stop, is because at that point in time, we effectively receive what I refer to as our last check, which, when I say last check, I'm talking about our last paycheck as it relates to retiring. So all of the work that you do up until that point in time is going to be, very significant. But how you take that last check and what occurs with your cash flow afterwards is very meaningful. In the financial world, I run across people all the time that do all different types of planning. And most of the planning that they spend their time on is accumulation planning, which is, 401k planning, where to put money, parking money in a bank, doing investments, all well and good, all very important. However, if we don't do accumulation planning with distribution planning in mind, what we'll find is that we can really have a significant challenge ahead of us. As a matter of fact, I used to give out statistics. I don't know what they are. I should have looked them up before we started tonight. But, we would talk about Mount Everest, and, the reality is that more people have passed away on the descent, not the ascent of the mountain. So it's not going up the mountain, which was, the most dramatic. It was actually even the ability to get down the mountain. And that's the reality in retirement. The reason why I say that's the reality in retirement is, when you think about it, what's occurring is that while you're working, you have cash flow. It's the day you stop working that your cash flow from earned income stops, and then the clock starts ticking. So up until retirement, the way that most of us view wealth and the way that we would judge how are we doing well, not well, is we would mirror or actually measure net worth. However, when we're in retirement, it's really not about net worth. It's really about cash flow and quality of life. And the reason why I say it's really not as much about net worth is, if you really think about it, if I were to take two main assets for someone in retirement, and I said, you've got a residence, which is many people at retirement age, one of the objectives, and we do like the objective, is to pay off the mortgage or to not have a mortgage in retirement. So if you thought about it this way, so let's say somebody gets to retirement and they have a house worth $500,000. On the other side of that, let's say they had a retirement account of $1 million. That would provide someone with a net worth of $1.5 million, assuming no other assets. However, the house really isn't an asset in retirement with regard to cash flow. In fact, a house in retirement is more like a debt. And the reason being is because we still have to pay taxes, we still have to pay insurances, we still have to pay upkeep. So a true asset in retirement is something that provides cash flow to us. And so a residence, although provides net worth, doesn't necessarily provide cash flow. And so the most significant thing in retirement is really cash flow and quality of life. So we're going to be taking a closer look at what really matters. So as I mentioned before, when we think in terms of cash flow, the benefit during our working years is that anything that we're saving during the accumulation phase of life, we're typically not living off of that. We should be living off of our cash flow, what we earn. So when we're living off earnings, there's no pressure on what occurs with our investments. In fact, if the investments went down today a little bit, it doesn't matter because I didn't take any money out of it. It's when we're taking money out of our investments that it matters. And what occurs when you kind of see these two arrows that you're looking at here on the chart. You're seeing the accumulation side of life, which is, hey, I've got cash flow coming in from work and so forth. But once I hit that last check, I retire. Okay. At that point, it's everything I accumulated up till then, and all of the different sources of income have to provide me for the rest of my life. Pretty significant time. The reason why it's significant is there's a few different aspects of retirement that you've got to think about. Here are the factors. Number one, we've got to think about rates of return. And when we think about rates of return, if you watch what's occurred on the markets for the last couple of years, last year in 2022, both the S&P 500, including U.S. Treasuries, which were often seen as one of the safest investments, if you looked at them, they had pretty significant down years. So if I looked at, say, the S&P 500 last year, it had double-digit down, losses, close to 18%. If I also look at a 10-year Treasury last year, and I bought a Treasury on January 1st of 2022, and I looked at what I could cash it in for on December 31st of 2022, that 10-year Treasury was also down 10%, as far as how the value of it went down. So rates of return, we can't control those in retirement, and it's relevant. The other thing that's important in retirement, which is a big deal, is life expectancy or longevity risk. So it's interesting. If I were to think about this, if I got to retirement and I had $1 million, and so at retirement age, I get $1 million, and I look and I go, hey, I'm age 65, I'm going to be out of here, say at 75. Well, I know I've got 10 years to spend that money down. However, here's what the catch is. More and more people are living longer and longer. Not uncommon to have people spending 10, 20, 30, some even 40 years in retirement. So if I'm going to spend 20, 30 years or more in retirement, then that longevity risk of the longer I'm here, the more pressure it puts on me and my money. That's a big deal. And that also puts pressure on what we call the rate of distribution. I can't pay an asset down over 10 years knowing that I could be in retirement for 20 or 30. The other big risk that we have is what's called sequence of return risk, which I'm going to share with you. And I've never even talked about yet what I call unplanned life events. Here's the reality. 60 to 70% of the population will have a long-term care event. Statistically speaking, those are the numbers. So when I'm speaking to a couple and I've got a couple in front of me and we're chatting, there's a high probability that one of the two will have a long-term care event and need extra care in retirement. And so that's a hit or a charge to cash flow. That could be a charge to assets if not planned for properly. On the other side of that, life events, when I have two spouses that are on Social Security and one of them passes, one of those Social Security benefits is going to go away. It's going to be the lower one. So these factors in retirement are very important. We need to plan for them. So let's go a little bit further. For those of us who think in terms of net worth, I always kid and I say, so cash flow is for me. It's what I spend. It's what I use when I go out to dinner. It's what I use when I go and I play golf. It determines the car I drive, the vacations I spend, I utilize. The net worth that I have ultimately is what's going to get left to the next generation. And so what I want you to really think about is anything that you don't spend over your lifetime, your cars, your house, any of that retirement account that's not used, money in the bank, that net worth is what gets left. And so what I tell you is that net worth is ultimately going to be for somebody else. The cash flow is really going to be for you. So keep that in mind when you think about retirement. So here's a known fact, and we don't think about it often, but it's a reality. At some point, we all are going to stop working. It's a fact of life. It's either going to be voluntary, which I refer to as a life event. That life event is going to be, when I think in terms of voluntaries, could be, that I retired, I hit the lottery, something really good happens, and it gave me the ability to stop working. Or it's going to be involuntary. The involuntary could be, I got laid off. And, it's interesting is, when we talk about, an involuntary event that stops my cash flow or stops me from working, as soon as that occurs, then whatever I've accumulated in my lifetime has to carry me for the rest of my life unless I find new cash flow. So new cash flow is I go back to work, I get retrained, get reprogrammed, or I hear some people say, hey, I'm going to have an encore career. That's a fancy way of saying I'm going to go back to work now that I'm in retirement. Another involuntary could be due to a disability, could be due to death or anything along those lines. So good planning will address both voluntary and involuntary, times when we stop working. So let's start talking about coming down the mountain. Let's assume that we did most things right. We've accumulated some assets, and now we're going to talk about how do we retire? Where do we start? Because it's very complex, and I want to make it a little bit more simple and a little bit easier for you to understand. So first thing I'm going to tell you that we need to do is before you would even consider retiring, I know people don't like to do budgets. I don't like the word myself. It kind of sounds like, someone telling me what I can spend, what I can't spend. So what I'm going to tell you is you do have to figure out, though, what it is that you think you're going to be spending in retirement, and you break it into two areas. I would start with what are your fixed expenses? Fixed expenses, for the most part, are what are my real estate taxes? What are my insurance costs? If I have homeowners association fees, what does it cost for the upkeep of my home? What's your rent? Whatever the fixed costs are that it happens month in and month out, the cable bill, the cell phone bills, you got to calculate all that. And then you have what I refer to as variable expenses. So the variable expenses are, getting your hair cut. Obviously, I know you're seeing me. You see, I don't spend much money on that. I pick on me once in a while here and there just for a chuckle. But variable expenses is going out to dinner. Variable expenses could be how often you're playing golf. But you need to build all of that in and come up with what I call the burn rate, which is what does it cost you or will it cost you to live? And then based upon, once you know what it costs you to live, a couple of things I'd like you to understand too and think about, because a lot of people go, I don't need much. Think about this. While we work Monday to Friday, we go to work, we earn, we may spend some money. When do we spend the most amount of money? I spend the most amount of money on the weekends. I've got time on my hands. I get a little bored. I'm looking for things to do. I'm running to Home Depot. I'm doing something. I want to go and do something actively. I want to go play golf. So I spend more on weekends. Remember, when we retire, every day is Saturday. Every day is the weekend. And what we're looking to do is we're looking to find interest. We're looking to experience different things. And so we tend to spend more then. So don't really kind of cut it right down to, I think I can get by with X. Try to figure out what's your real burn rate. What will it cost you to live comfortably in retirement? Now, when we're doing that, the next thing that I'm going to ask you to do is, now I want you to compare, well, what's your income in retirement? And when we start looking at what's your income, income versus expenses, do I have more income than expense? Okay. Or do I have more expense than income? Or as I would say, do I have more money at the end of the month, or do I have more month at the end of the money? So when we look at income, we want to break it down a little bit more detailed. So when I say income, here's the detail. There's certain aspects of your life that are going to provide guaranteed income. So Social Security, that's guaranteed income. Pensions. So if you work for the state, or you work for the federal government, or you work for a large company and you get income, that pension oftentimes is guaranteed income. Annuities with many insurance companies are guaranteed income. Business buyouts. It's very common nowadays that small business owners, they don't always get a lump sum buyout up front. Many of these buyouts take place over time. Rental income provides income. So what I would tell you is look at all of these incomes that you have going on, and that starts with your base. That's the income that's coming in off of different guarantees and also different assets. The assets would have been the business interest and the rental income. Now, what I'd like to do is spend a couple of minutes here on Social Security. And the reason being is there's a few key things that you need to understand. First of all, there's a thing that's called eligibility. The age for eligibility for Social Security is age 62. Now, it doesn't mean that's when you should apply for Social Security. It just means you're eligible. So assuming that you paid in 40 quarters, which is what helps to make you eligible, and you meet the age of 62, you're eligible. However, that is not your normal retirement age. Your normal retirement age, if you look down a little bit further, is age 66 plus. The maximum normal retirement age right now is age 67. And there's a good chance that the federal government will push that out a little bit for some of the younger people. Now, what that means, the difference between normal retirement age and eligibility is this. If you are continuing to work over a certain amount, approximately $18,000, for every $2 you earn, you will get back $1 of benefits. So we do a whole nother course on Social Security planning. We have some great speakers. I'm just giving you high level. The other thing I tell you is that the reality is that if you retire at age 62, for every year that you're retiring early, you lose approximately 8% from your normal retirement age. So if you were going to go out at $3,000 a month, for every year that you go out early, if that was your normal retirement age, you're going to get less at age 62. So I'm not a big fan of that. The reason why I say that is I like the idea of people waiting till normal retirement age to get there. The other key age, by the way, is age 65. So when people call me up and they go, Frank, I'm getting close to retirement, I want to come in and see you, or Frank, I want to retire, the first question that I ask is, how old are you? And if they're under age 65, I ask a simple question every single time. What are you going to do about medical benefits? Because Medicare kicks in at 65. Prior to 65, if you retire and you don't have medical benefits, individual medical coverage can be very expensive. So what I would tell you is age 62, you know you're eligible, not usually a recommendation unless you have health issues or you have other things going on that you need the money. Age 65 is one of the key ones. I would tell you, first hurdle you should cover, make sure you have medical benefits. And then the next thing is normal retirement age is when you can receive benefits and there's no paybacks or downside for any earnings you may have going on. The benefit, by the way, because there's some people that'll wait till age 70, is if you're healthy, okay, because what I tell you is healthy, I'm going to show you this in a minute, for every year that you're waiting, Social Security is increasing by approximately 8% per year. So every year that you wait, that benefit goes up until the age of 70. After age 70, it no longer goes up. So you don't want to not take it, at 70. You want to take it at least no later than 70. Now, that has to do also with your health. The reason why it has to do with your health is this. If you had serious health conditions, you may be better off taking it early, because to make up the difference of the larger payment versus years that you waited, it could take approximately 10 to 14 years, depending upon when you start. So the longer you live, okay, waiting makes sense because you'll have more. But if you don't have a long life expectancy, then taking benefits a little earlier makes sense. The other one I'm going to point out is spousal benefits. So if I were to look at my situation, and my wife's name is Diane, so if Diane had less income than myself over the years, or perhaps she didn't work, maybe she was helping with the family, or it could be vice versa. She worked, I was taking care of the family. So what they do is they're actually looking at average income. So if her income was less, Diane would also be eligible for Social Security of whatever hers is. But if mine was significantly higher, she could opt out when I retire, okay, to get half my benefits, assuming she's eligible. So a spouse gets the greater of their benefits or half of their spouse's benefits when they both go out and they're both eligible. So Social Security, again, plays a big part in retirement. Years ago, it wasn't a big deal. I shouldn't say it wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal. However, the numbers that we see on it nowadays are significantly higher, especially last year. Many people had a significant increase of approximately 7-8% than when they increased Social Security. So it's not uncommon to see people getting 2,500 to 3,000 or more per month. And then when a spouse is getting that much, a couple could have 50, 60, $70,000 a year in Social Security benefits. So pretty interesting. It's important for you to be aware of that. So once we have calculated our guaranteed income, the checks that are coming in monthly, quarterly, or whatever, then we're going to go to our accumulated assets. So this is the bucket of money that if I looked and I said, hey, I've got money in savings in the bank, I've got an investment account, I've got retirement accounts. What is it that I have? Okay, what assets do I have that will produce cash flow to me and that I can get a return on? So when we start looking at these assets, what we have to understand is, where does money and cash flow come from? So, nowadays it's interesting. If we were sitting here 2 years ago, I'd be talking about interest in a bank and I'd say, hey, you're getting 1% or 2%. Nowadays we're seeing CDs at 4%, 4.5%, and we're actually saw a few of them over 5% recently. So interest rates today, while we're doing this, talk, are 4 or 5%. We have dividends. Dividends are what we can get off of stocks. So I might have a stock that pays a nice dividend. The difference between, interest on a bank account or savings account and so forth is those are fairly safe. The stock values can fluctuate, but they'll pay dividends. So dividends are when companies are paying out part of their earnings. Dividends can be changed, by the way, just so you're aware of it. And then we have bonds, and bonds pay interest, and they call it, what's the yield on the bond? And those, again, are paying 4s and 5s nowadays. And it's all depending upon, when you're hearing this or, listening to this conversation we're having today. Now, if I think about this, 2 or 3 years ago, we would be talking to people and we would talk to them about taking money out in retirement. We were talking to them about taking out 3% or 4%, which I'm going to explain in just a couple of minutes. But when interest rates are 1 and 2 and bond yields are 2 or 3, and you're taking out 3 and 4 and 5, how does that happen? The way that happens is we're taking out what's called total return. We're taking part from dividends, part from interest, and we're taking part from the return or the growth of the stock or bond that we own. When we base it on total return, which is historically how we've done it, we also add an element of risk to what's occurring, which is called sequence of return risk, which I'm going to explain in a little bit. So what I want you to understand is every type of asset that you own has a way that they pay a return. And it could be, again, interest, dividends, bonds are interest, AKA we'll call it a yield. We could be pulling from total return, which actually creates more risk. Or there are also what is referred to as annuities, and annuities will provide what are called withdrawal options, many with guaranteed withdrawals, or what's actually called annuitization, which is where you're receiving principal and interest, typically over a single or joint life expectancy. So if I were talking about Diane and I annuitized something or took a withdrawal, I could have it for my life or a joint life. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So a few minutes ago, you heard me talk about, being retired, and you heard me talk about 3% or 4% a year. So there's a term in the marketplace, it's called the safe withdrawal rate. And so there's kind of a misunderstanding around this. The misunderstanding on the safe withdrawal rate is the assumption that you pull out 4% per year and your principal always stays intact. That's not what the safe withdrawal rate actually is saying. What the safe withdrawal rate is really saying is, how much can you take out without running out of money? So if somebody was taking out 4% off of their portfolio for the rest of their life, they could end up with more money, same money, less money. It doesn't guarantee the principal. It will often fluctuate. As a matter of fact, this was a chart that we were able to pull down from BlackRock. And what this was showing as an example is somebody, with $500,000, it shows them taking out money at different returns utilizing a blended portfolio. So what it's showing here, if you think about it, is, look at a different interest rate. So as an example, if I retired, okay, December of 1999, and I was pulling out 8% of my money. Now, by the way, I don't think anybody would tell you to take out 8%, but I just show you that. It's showing that portfolio would have crashed in 2011 or 2012 approximately. When I go and I take it out at 7%, it's showing I would have run out of money here. If I go to 6%, I would have run out of money here. If I was taking out at 5%, we see the money went down, but I didn't quite run out. It was at the 4% rate that what we're seeing is that the money was somewhat staying intact. So the takeaway that you should have is that the withdrawal rate that you take your money out in retirement, okay, is probably going to be somewhere between 3 and 4%, if you think about it. And that's assuming that you're pulling off of a total return rate. Now, once I do total return, the whole idea of sequence of returns is what we're really getting into here. So I know there's a lot of numbers, so I'm going to explain to you how to look at this. So I just showed you if somebody retired in the year 2000, okay, or 1999, they had the Christmas party, got a gold watch, they were done. Had $1 million, walked out the door. When they had that $1 million and walked out the door, then what we had is we had them taking out $50,000 a year or 5%. So just for example, we wanted you to see how this works. So in year one, we've got them $1 million. They take out $50,000 to live on. Okay. Left the portfolio, say with 950. The market was off 9% that year, thus bringing the portfolio to 863. What occurred in year 2000, 2001, 2002 is we had 3 consecutive negative years of returns. If that person who retired stayed in that portfolio, took out the $50,000 a year for that period of time, what you would have seen is 14 years later, that $1 million would have been worth $368,000. Now, I can tell you if that was myself, I would be pretty worried about, my retirement. I wouldn't be sleeping very well at night. That could happen. We don't know what they're going to be. Now, if we take a look at something on the next slide right here, what you see is if I reversed the order of the returns. So if you look here, that negative 9% is what happened in the last year, and that positive 13% here occurred in the first year. So what's interesting here is if I start out with a different sequence of returns, wow, take a look at this. Instead of 368, I had $1,077,000. So my point to you when I just showed you that whole sequence of return risk is to share with you, we don't know what the future is going to hold when you retire. Because of that, that's why we take out that safe withdrawal rate, and we need to have that blended portfolio. And so having said that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about different strategies in retirement of what we can do. So here's what I'd like you to think about a little bit. Number one, we talked about what are you spending? What's your burn rate? Let's then calculate guaranteed income sources. Once we have the guaranteed income sources, now what we need to do is we need to look at what are the distribution strategies that we need to utilize on our assets. And then beyond that, do we have any what I call free capital? So free capital means what happens when happy life events come up or negative life events. So happy life events might be, when we're retired, typically it's not our kids that we're paying for college, hopefully. But maybe what we have is we've got one of our grandkids going to college and we want to help a little bit. Or maybe we've got, a wedding that comes up, or maybe we want to go on a trip to Italy. So we need free capital to enjoy that. If I'm living on a certain cash flow and I start consuming my capital, what that means is if I was living off a 4% withdrawal rate and then I'm taking money out for, oh, give me 10,000 for a wedding, or give me $20,000 for this really fancy vacation, that actually is increasing my distribution rate, putting significantly more pressure on the portfolio. So what we want to do is we want to figure out and try to strategize to increase more guaranteed income sources if possible. So let me show you what I mean by that. So give me a second. Oh, went too far. I got to go to something else on the screen, so bear with me a second here. Oh, logged me out. We're going to get logged back in a second. That's what they do for security purposes. Okay. So we have our clients, I call them finally retired. Finally, that's my little kidding here and there. So one of the things that we're going to do now is I'm going to share with you what people typically are thinking is going to occur in retirement. And so when I say what they think is going to occur is they think it's going to look like this. They think that they're going to get to retirement age, let's call it 65, and God willing, they're healthy and they'll go up till 100 or through 100 or whatever number they choose. So let's assume they retire at 65 or whatever their number is, and they have 35 years in retirement. Let's assume they had $1 million of retirement accounts. Okay. And I said retirement accounts for a reason. And now we're going to take the 4% distribution rate. And again, even though I show the 4% distribution rate and it's going to look like the million stays intact, it might not, because if I go back to total return, that may not stay intact. It could fluctuate like I just showed you a moment ago. Now, having said that, I would never want to mislead you on something. Today, and because some people get a false sense of security, they look and they go, well, Frank, CDs are 4%, 5% now. Interest rates are higher. They're better than they used to be. Because if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I'd be talking about 1% and 2%. And that's where total return would have been more relevant. What's going on today, so everybody's on the same page, is we have what's referred to as an inverted yield curve. So what that simply is saying is that short-term rates today are higher than long-term rates, indicating that the markets anticipate rates in the future going back down. It doesn't mean they're going to go back down to the 1% and 2%, but they are anticipating rates will be lower in the future than they are today. The way you would see that is if you went and you looked at, call it a 1-year treasury versus a 10-year treasury, the 1-year has a significantly higher return than the 10-year. And the further out I go, the more it kind of flattens out. So I want you to remember that, but let's just for simplicity's sake, let's look at what this looks and feels like over your lifetime. So assuming $1 million, 4%, we're going to go with taxes. The reason why, again, I throw taxes in here is in retirement, most people have a lot of their retirement assets in qualified plans. These are the 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, 457 plans. Anything that has a number on it typically sounds like you got a tax benefit somewhere, because the number is usually indicative of something in the tax code. But the government's going to want to get paid, and they're either going to get paid as you take it now, or they'll force the money out in what's called a required minimum distribution later. So let's just take a look for a second and talk about $1 million of assets in retirement. And again, because I told you that it'll fluctuate. And so $1 million of assets is earning 4%. And I know that I've got some analyticals on the line because I've got friends that I know are tuned in, and they're going to say, Frank, last I calculated, 4% on $1 million is not $38,462. And that's a true statement. What occurs is this. Unless we retire and on January, I go to the butcher I go to the grocery stores and I give them IOUs, and then I pay them at the end of the year. When I'm pulling that 4% out through the course of the year, I'm using cash flow throughout the course of the year, which is why it's showing like that. So just so that you are aware of it, the reason why I chose 38,462 is because I'm pulling money out monthly or the beginning of the year, because I've got payments made to everybody through the course of the year. So on 38,462, I netted out paid 9,600 in taxes. I netted out 28,000. So the first thing that, if I was not giving this presentation, but was a participant watching like you may be, hopefully you are, I look at that and I goes, wow, I thought that'd be a lot more. And the reason why I say that is, when we work our whole lifetime and, you get $1 million accumulated, that's a lot of money. And by the way, when I'm showing something like this, I'm talking about the top 2 to 3% of the population has this kind of money at retirement today. So if somebody said to me, hey, Frank, what percent of the population has $1 million of liquid assets not in their home at retirement? And I'm going to say it's less than 2%. So this is not a large percentage of the population that has this kind of money. So if you got 500,000, you can do the math. 500,000 at 4% or 5% is generating 20 to 25,000 a year. And again, because we don't know how long we're going to live, I can't take the money and pay it down over 10 and go, hey, give me 100,000 a year for 10 years. So if you look at this, if this person went out and they lived to 100, out of the $1 million that they had, it generated $1.3 million of income, paid the IRS $336,000 of it, and netted to them $1 million of cash flow. And whatever's left, could be more, could be less, depending upon the markets, will go to their family. So what I tell people is this is the most expensive way to retire. The reason why it's the most expensive is because I'm trying to live off my interests. It means I'm trying to preserve principal. And as I'm trying to do that, and I'm in investments that create that, I don't get full utilization of what I have. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I were to look at this a little different, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? Let me just get my let this computer working here. And I said, well, problem is my picture is in the corner here covering that up. So there, now I can see. Need one more zero. What's a zero amongst friends? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to use the same 4%. And what I'm going to have occur here is I'm going to amortize the payment on this. What that means is we're going to pay down principal and interest over the course of the next 35 years on a guaranteed basis. So when I do that, what you're going to notice right away is the following. You're going to notice I got $1 million, but the $1 million is going down. But look at the difference in my cash flow. Instead of my cash flow being $38,462, what you're seeing that my cash flow is, it's like $51,000 or $40,000 net of tax. If I scroll down to the end of this, what you're going to see here, give you kind of an idea, is instead of having lived on, say, $1 million, I lived on $1.6 million. There is a significant difference in cash flow to me. I had 60% more cash flow in retirement by consuming the principal and interest over my life expectancy. Now, some of you, when you're looking here, and I know I've got a couple of friends of mine who are analyticals, they're looking and they're going, hey, Frank, that's all fine, but look at the legacy value. Frank, you spent every dime, you didn't leave anything to the kids. And so that's where I say, well, what if I had other assets? What if I owned insurance? There's plenty of planning in a macro world when I look at everything that could have come into place. And then somebody that's analytical out there will say to me, well, Frank, if that occurred, then maybe I might not have had $1 million. And I said, well, even if you had to go out and you had to hedge that a little bit, and maybe instead of having $1 million, you had 800,000 because you bought insurance over your lifetime for this. So remember the numbers here. okay, which I'm going to show you, and I recalculate. Let's go to the end. I'll go throw one other little thing in here, sorry, just so that nobody loses sleep over this tonight, because somebody will be sitting there saying, this is really bothering me. I don't see how he did that. So let's assume I was able to keep a death benefit in of $1 million. We're going to recalculate. What if it looked more like this? So what occurred is, one person that was living off of that 4% had $1 million. The other person had 27% more income, and they both left their family $1 million. Not a bad gig. So your takeaway should be living off interest only in retirement. Most expensive way to retire. Now, someone will also say to me, well, Frank, could I have done something else? What about annuities? So let me show you what that means. And by the way, if you've ever read any of my books, you're going to see very quickly, I am not a fan of annuities, generally speaking, but I like annuities in distribution. The reason why I like them in distribution is because they provide guaranteed income. So when we look at that, here's a way to kind of think about it. I've got the same $1 million. And typically, by the way, and this is important for you to take away, I like annuities many times in non-qualified accounts even better than in retirement accounts. And the reason being is because there's something that's called an exclusion ratio. And so that's a big word for saying this. When an annuity pays out principal, the principal is not taxable. Only the interest part is. So there's significant tax savings in that versus a straight investment. So example is I'm going to be right here. And so I'm going to show you that. We're going to recalculate. Take a look at, and by the way, I did this as a joint annuity. So I was showing it as if it were, say, myself and my wife. So on interest only, it's exactly what I showed you before, which is I got $1 million of investments. Maybe I had a CDs that I was able to ladder out for 40 years. And by the way, that doesn't exist, but I was giving you the benefit of the doubt. So there's 40,000 of income minus 10,000 of taxes, you netted 30. I went and I do an annuity or something along that. And in the annuity, the distribution rate is almost double that. It's 65,000. But the interesting part of that is a chunk of that is my principal. Only a little bit is is interest. Therefore, the taxes are lower. You're going to notice significantly more cash flow. And then what you're going to see here is when my payments all of a sudden start to shift, and now what's happening is I'm still getting my 65,000, but my taxes went up for a reason, which is now I'm getting all the interest. My net cash flow is a little less, but still way more than 30. Look at the difference here. $1 million of income versus almost 2 million of income. So the takeaway that I'd like you to have is this. In retirement, utilizing different strategies for distribution may provide an opportunity for significantly greater cash flow. Because remember, in retirement, I said it's about cash flow, not net worth. And again, when someone says to me, well, Frank, what about the kids? And I hear that all the time, and that's on this legacy side. So let's do this. If I throw on here, on the annuitization side, 800. Meaning that I had to reallocate money elsewhere. Oh, that was 8 million. That would have been really good. And I do that recalculation off of 800. What you're still going to find is my income was 50% more anyway. And by the way, even if you said, well, the heck with the kids, I want the license plate that says I'm spending my kids' inheritance. The difference between what I just did here provided you with what's called 200,000 of free capital. So if I took $1 million and I didn't need the whole $1 million to live the income off of, and I did the 800, and I was able to take the $200,000 difference, and maybe that's in the first 10 years of retirement, maybe I'm taking 10 or 20,000 a year and doing really great vacations while I'm in what I call the go-go years. So, in retirement, I say there's three stages. There's the go-go years, which is you're healthy, you're going, you're doing, you're having fun, you're going. Then there's the slow go years, which is all of a sudden we hit a point where, wow, getting on planes, walking around all over the place is too much work. So I'm not doing as much of that. And then there is a point in life where we just can't go. Okay. We become more, staying closer to home, staying closer to family. So what I would tell you is the idea of free capital. And again, when I talk about free capital, when we look and we say, hey, if I don't need $1 million to rely on, I can get the same income out of 600 or 700,000, and I've got guaranteed income. Boy, doesn't that make life easier? That's how retirement should start to look. So let me just stop at that for a second. And, I want your takeaway to be, that's what distribution planning should look like. So now let me go to a couple of other things, as we're moving along here, which is, so as we were just talking about retirement, I'm going to summarize a couple of things for you. Number one, we started with talking about, what's your burn rate, what's your guaranteed forms of income, where do you have your money? Is it qualified money subject all to tax, or is it other types of investments? Are you better off perhaps amortizing or even annuitizing part of what you have and looking at different strategies? And then once we go beyond that, then the next one really becomes one of, at some point, we're always going to have money in the markets some way, somehow. The reason why I tell you that we will always have money in the market some way, somehow, is simply by looking at this chart for a second. And when I look at this chart, here's the takeaways I want you to have. You'll notice that the idea of cash over the last, say, 20 to 25 years has paid next to nothing. You had $100,000, it didn't grow very much. And even if I did bonds, it didn't grow very much. And if I would really look at that and I said, well, bonds did 4.8% on average over 20 years, the reality is if I adjusted for inflation, it lost money the same as cash. So I'm always going to need some level of equities. The difference, however, is if I have a diversified portfolio, that's the goal. So the goal is to take some of the volatility out. So when we look and I talk about volatility, one of the key ways to think about it is this. When you turn on the news at night and it talks about the Dow Jones, the Standard & Poor's 500, what you're hearing about is what the stock market did in general. And the volatility level on those, to give you an idea, is like a 16 to 17. When you actually have your assets diversified, okay, amongst different asset classes, you can dramatically reduce the risk, but you didn't have to carve out half of the return. So by having a properly diversified portfolio allows you to achieve better return with less volatility, because we need you to stay in the game. And so this here is kind of telling the same thing, which is, excuse me one second. So if I look here, it's showing what occurred with the S&P 500, and it's showing, back in 2000 to 2002, and that was when I was showing those 3 negative years. And then it shows, well, what occurred then? What did a diversified portfolio do, and how did I feel? Okay, and then when all of a sudden things took off from 03 to 07, I was like, oh my gosh, look, it jumped up 82. But what did a diversified portfolio do? It didn't get as much. Okay, and then I've got where I lost money again. What you're going to notice is over time, okay, key thing, over time, not overnight. That diversified portfolio will smooth out the ride and achieve very nice returns. Now, we can't guarantee that. History doesn't repeat itself. But what I can tell you is historically, if I look for the last 100 years, diversified portfolio does help to smooth out that ride. So working with an advisor that can help you with that is a big deal. And this here just talks about, instead of, looking at this and saying, hey, if I got, full ups, full downs of the market, what if I got half the up and half the down? And so what you're going to notice here is even if I had half the up and half the down, I still did better. So the point is either a diversified portfolio makes sense, which is, we love that, or you can also do nowadays what are called some buffered products. So buffered products will reduce some of the downside, but it does cap your upside. But even if I was again, half the up, half the down, I ended up with a pretty good ride without a lot of volatility. So that should be a takeaway, that for that free capital, you should be looking at that. And by the way, as you're moving through life and you're getting closer to retirement, within the, say, 3 to 5 years of retirement, you're going to want to be like, taking some of the volatility out, because we don't want a lot of volatility occurring right at the point of retirement. So I always say it's like coming off the Garden State Parkway or the New Jersey Turnpike. I might be flying as I'm going forward. Okay. But as I'm coming towards that exit ramp, I want to get in the right lane. I want to take my foot off the pedal a little bit and get a little bit more cautious so that I can, enter into retirement on the right foot and without a lot of losses. So as we wrap up, there's a couple of takeaways that I want you to also remember. One is volatility in the markets. Okay. It's normal. It's going to happen. The way to plan for that is by having liquidity, having proper emergency funds, having guaranteed income. The other thing is we have to plan for life events. Life events are making sure that we're taking care of for healthcare, things of that nature. We also have to plan for surviving or healthy spouses. The reality is that Social Security and many strategies utilized in retirement are based upon 2 lives. And so when we think about it, when someone passes, and if Social Security was, let's say $20,000, $30,000 or more a year on, let's say, one of the spouses or the lower Social Security, that goes away when someone passes. So we've got to make sure that we're planning for the surviving spouse, because hey, I have many clients that I've worked with over the years and people that have come to me over the years, and a spouse passes or they just lost a spouse and they came to me afterwards. And all of a sudden, for the first time, they're saying, wow, that Social Security of $1,500 a month, $2,000, $2,500 a month stopped. And how am I going to live on what I've got coming in? And so it puts pressure on the surviving spouse to try to come up with that. So we like having strategies in place. We like insurance for that. And then the last thing is, and you always hear me talk about this concept of last check. Little cheap plug is that was the last book that we did. And so the true last check is what ultimately goes to your kids and your grandkids and your charities. So having proper estate planning documentation done and proper planning that makes sure that, they're not fighting over money, that your intentions were exactly carried out, how you want them to see them out, very important. So don't wait till the last minute to get this done. And the other thing I'm going to tell you is the best time to do the planning for all of this is while you're in accumulation mode. 5 years, 10 years, the earlier you address everything that we're talking about. In other words, think of it this way. For some of you that are on the line, you might have, where you're 50, 55, 60. I'm going to nudge you that your kids at 20, 25, and 30 should be setting themselves up now, because it's going to make their life so much better later. So having said that, I wanted to thank you for the time that we spent together. It's my pleasure to share this with you as a part of CNA Financial Group. Please check back with your advisor. If you'd like a free copy of the book Last Check, we can have that emailed to you, but check with your advisor or follow up with us. And outside of that, I wish you a great evening and a great night.